Prepare to be illuminated.
Hi guys, Skypoint here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Salamanders deck in Horus Heresy Legions. As before, we're going to start by taking a look at the Warlords available and then go through the cards from cheapest to most expensive. But before that, we're going to take a look at the unique mechanics which make the Salamanders stand apart. So first of all is Survivor. The Salamanders make incredibly heavy use of the Survivor mechanic. What that does is when a unit dies, it's immediately healed back to its survivor value. So this little guy here, when you kill him, he'll come back to life with 1 health. And then you have to kill him a second time to make him go away. The second mechanic they have is Sacrifice. Yes, there we go. So Sacrifice, it only triggers when a unit dies when attacking. So it doesn't trigger if the enemy attacks you and kills you, but if you attack the enemy and die, the Survivor effect triggers, and some of these are very powerful. The cool thing about Survivor is that it triggers even if you're saved by Sacrifice. So many units can actually trigger their Sacrifice ability twice. Did I say that right? No. Sacrifice triggers even if you are saved by your Survivor ability. So many units can actually trigger Sacrifice once. Once they'll attack the enemy and die, and the Sacrifice will trigger, but then Survivor will bring them back to life, and the next turn they can attack again and trigger their Sacrifice effect for a second time. Okay, so with that, let's take a look at the Warlords who the Salamanders have. As with all Space Marine Legions, the Salamanders have 4 Warlords. The rank order which I give them from best to least effective is Artellus Numion is the single best Salamanders Warlord, and he's the one you see the most of at the high ends of the ladder. He's followed by Vulcan, who's actually my favorite Salamander Warlord. And then Cassian, Vaughn, and Nema Tor follow a bit behind. They just struggle a bit at the higher ends of the ladder, and I'll talk a bit about that when we look at those Warlords. But let's start with Artellus Numion. So at first glance he looks a bit underwhelming. He doesn't look like a top tier Warlord because he's only has 30 health like the common Warlords, and he's got 2 attack. But he has a bunch of tricks up his sleeve. First of all, his 30 health is actually 35 health because he has Survivor health. When he dies, sorry, he has Survivor 5. So when he dies, he comes back to life with 5 health. He also starts with an extra card, which is cool. But his real ace mechanic, I guess, is his energy ability. You spend 1 energy and you can give a unit Survivor 1. That allows your units to stick around when they would otherwise die, and it even means that a unit which has already burned its Survivor ability and is going to die the next time it gets attacked, well, you can refresh Survivor by spending 1 energy on it. So his units are incredibly tricky to kill, and generally if I'm facing an Artellus Numion, I'll just try and prioritize damaging him directly instead, because it's really hard to get board domination against him. Alright, so I've already made a video on Artellus, so if you want to see him in action, just look through my posted videos and you'll find one there. Alright, next up is my favorite, Vulcan, the Primarch of the Salamanders. So what makes Vulcan so great? Well, he's got pretty average stats for a Primarch, 2 attack, 40 health. He does have Survivor 5, so his health is actually 45, which makes him the toughest of all of the Warlords. That's not all though. He has this energy ability, which is create a teaching card in your hand. A teaching card is sort of like a particular type of tactic which is unique to the Salamanders. I personally don't like this energy ability, simply because it's random. You don't know which one you're going to get, so when you spend your 2 energy, you don't know if it's something appropriate to your situation or not. So even though I like using Vulcan, I tend to not use his energy ability unless I absolutely have to. But the other really cool thing about Vulcan is his, let's go down there to the bottom, here we go, his Reckoning. So Vulcan has this Reckoning which is normally impossible to trigger until he actually goes down to 0 health. So once his Survivor triggers, you get to activate his Reckoning for a cost of 1 energy, so it's super cheap to do. And then when that happens, he heals a couple of points. It's not too many. I think he heals like 8 points or something like that, 5 or 8 points. But he turns into Vulcan Reborn. So Vulcan Reborn has Survivor 3. So you immediately get your Survivor back, and what that means is that you can actually keep triggering his Reckoning every time you die and his Survivor triggers. That means that Vulcan can be incredibly sticky at the end of the game and tricky to kill. The enemy must be able to hit you with overwhelming force in order to kill you. He still has that teaching ability, which again, as I mentioned, I rarely use, but the other handy thing is his attack value goes up to 3. So he's pretty tough, and once you kill him, he comes back and he's kind of tougher than before. So this is why I like playing as Vulcan. The other 2 warlords who we have is Cassian Vaughn. So Cassian Vaughn also has Survivor 5, so he's effectively 40 health. And he's got this energy ability, which is deal 1 damage to all enemies. That ends up being a little bit underwhelming in this game, which is why you very rarely see Cassian Vaughns being played at high levels. There's not much which you can capitalize on by doing 1 damage to all enemies for 2 energy cost. Most of the time you want to be trying to do a lot of damage to 1 enemy, or doing some other crazy thing. And the final warlord is Nema Tor. So Nema Tor used to be known as Mema Tor. In fact, some people still call him that for being really bad. Eventually, there are a couple of people who've worked out builds for him which can work with a lot of luck at the higher end of the ladder. He's sort of pretty reliable as a way of beating Garrow, but that's about it. With other warlords, you're kind of dependent on your luck. He can be a lot of fun to play. He doesn't have Survivor, but he has 35 health and 2 attack. But his little ability here is pretty interesting. You spend 1 energy and he becomes 4 attack until your next turn. And anyone who attacks any of your troops will take 2 damage in return. So it makes it sort of punishing to attack his troops. At the same time, it becomes punishing to attack him. The only problem is this is a very reactive ability. It doesn't really let you control the flow of the game much, and so it's a bit weaker than many other abilities. But I personally rank Nema Tor just a little bit behind Vulcan, and sometimes if I'm just bored and really want to have fun, I'll play him. He's kind of uncommon, people don't know how to react, and there's nothing more fun than facing Angron or Garrow, controlled by a player who knows nothing other than how to smash his warlord into the enemy's face. And then as Nema Tor, you just turn into his hardened 4 attack form at the end of each of your turns and watch the enemy kill themselves on you. Alright, so that's the 4 warlords who we have for the Salamanders. Let's start going through their card deck. The first of them is Devotion, which is the first of the teaching cards we'll see. The one common trait among all of the teaching cards is that they're average. I mean, they're kind of neat, but the Salamanders have a lot of really powerful units and some really cool tactics in their deck. And a lot of the times I just rather play a unit or trigger a unit's ability or play one of the other tactics than play one of the teaching cards. I find they're nice to haves rather than must haves. And Devotion is no exception. It gives a single +1/1 bonus to a friendly troop. That's often the difference between a troop dying during your turn when it attacks or surviving, or being able to kill an enemy troop or not. But it's kind of situational. Sometimes it's not going to do all that much for you, so I tend to not include Devotion in my decks. Sorkar Hunters are next. So this is kind of interesting. Most of the time the 1 energy troops are kind of trash because they die so easily. They'll die before they get to do anything. Sorkar Hunters are the exception. They've got Survivor 1, so even though they only have 1 health, that's effectively 2 health, but 2 health which takes 2 actions to kill. Because remember, when you have Survivor, any excess damage which kills you is just lost, and then your Survivor triggers and you come back to life. So unlike many other 1 health units, Sorkar Hunters actually needs 2 hits in order to kill, which is kind of cool. I don't think they're a must-have in your deck, but if you're struggling with what to fill in for a Salamanders deck, these aren't bad to have. Benevolence is another tactic. Again, another teaching. Again, it's pretty decent. Heal 3 to your Warlord is one of the few direct heal abilities the Salamanders have, and to adjacent troops. I just find it's a little bit situational. To get the full value out of this, you must have troops on the board when you play Benevolence. I personally find with both Artellus Numion and Vulcan that I tend to not need a lot of healing for myself. With Numion, it's usually because the enemy's distracted trying to kill my perpetually spawning units. And with Vulcan, it's because I kind of can rely on my high initial health pool and my ability to keep coming back when killed to carry me through. But otherwise, if you feel like you want to include Benevolence, it's not a terrible card. I just sometimes feel there's better uses for 2 energy. Courtin Squad. These guys have great attack. They've got a great sacrifice ability. Potentially they're doing 5 damage to the enemy. Well, not even potentially. They are always doing 5 damage to the enemy when they attack. Their only problem is they have 1 health. And because of that powerful sacrifice ability, they're going to be prioritized for destruction by the enemy. So I will generally not include this card in a deck except for when I'm playing as Artellus Numion, because he can deploy them and give them Survivor 1, so it makes them much harder to kill. If you're not playing as Artellus Numion, I wouldn't include these guys because they die too quickly. The complete opposite of those guys is Oaken Squad. Oaken Squad has a high health pool for a 2 energy card. It's got 3 health. It also has Survivor 1, so that's effectively 4 health. And they've got this neat ability that they can deal 1 damage to an enemy and adjacent units. So this is the first of the area damage units we're going to start seeing in the Salamanders deck. I actually like these guys. I find that putting them down is a great first turn move. Usually because in the early game, most units end up having 3 health, right? So you can play these guys, and then in your turn, if the enemy plays a unit with 3 health, you can use their ability to cut it down to 1 health, as well as hitting the enemy Warlord probably. And then you can attack with your Warlord to finish off the enemy unit. And throughout all of that, Oaken Squad is not taking damage directly. And when the enemy does decide to try to kill them, they actually take a fair amount of effort to remove. So they're a neat unit to have there. Hope is the next teaching. This one is pretty decent. It's just really dependent on having a bunch of troops out there in order to get maximum value. And I usually find that I'm not hurting for cards. Like, I don't really need to draw more cards. So I will generally pass on Hope. I think it's probably the weakest of the teachings. Orbital Combat. This is a great card. You want to generally save this one until you reach the turn when the enemy can play their high damage tactic abilities. So I'm talking about Vengeful Spirit for the Sons of Horus, Conqueror for World Eaters. There's a bunch of 7 energy damage removal cards that Night Lords and Death Guard get, and so on. So what you do is, when you know the enemy is likely to reach a turn when they can play one of those high power cards, high power tactic cards, is you play Orbital Combat, and suddenly you brought yourself some time. And at the same time, you're also drawing a card, so you're cycling through your deck a bit faster. So I like this tactic. It's a neat one to have. Promethean Gift is the opposite. So Promethean Gift initially looks pretty cool. It says reduce the cost of your troops' ability by 1. The Salamanders deck, you'll see in a moment, has a lot of troops who have energy abilities in there. Promethean Gift should synchronize with those, but it's too situational. You're going to get the maximum value out of this when you have at least 2 or 3 units on the board. But by that time, you're probably already in a position to get board dominance, and you don't really need to reduce the cost of their abilities. So I will generally pass this. So let's put that one away and go on to Roshan Squad. Roshan Squad is one of the best 2 energy troops in the game. You drop them. They have Survivor 1, which really compensates for their low health pool, but their sacrifice ability is what we love about these guys. Deal 3 damage to the enemy Warlord. So you attack the enemy Warlord, you do 2 damage, and their sacrifice triggers and does 3 damage. And if you're playing as Artellus Numion, you can then spend 1 energy to give these guys Survivor 1 again and make them tricky to kill. So this is a really great card. No matter which Salamanders Warlord you're playing, you definitely want to include Roshan Squad and 2 of them in your deck. Saro is another teaching. It's kind of neat. It gives Survivor 1 to a troop, like Artellus' ability. It also draws a card, which is okay. Again, there's just better 2 energy things in the game, so I generally pass on this. I only use it if I generated it from Vulcan's special ability. Storm Eagle. Now this is good. There's not that many tactics in the game which will directly stun a target of your choice, and this is one of those. And it does 2 damage on top. Unlike the Emperor's Children card, which is equivalent, there's no restrictions. You can stun troops or you can stun the enemy warlord and deal 2 damage to them. So Storm Eagle is a great one to include. It'll really help you out in those pinch moments when the enemy drops a powerful unit and you don't have a response to it yet. And Tartar Squad is pretty cool as well. I like these guys. They have this great sacrifice ability, which is destroy a random enemy troop. So when you have these guys on the board, you can plow them into a powerful enemy, and if that's the only troop the enemy has left, and Tartar Squad will make sure it dies. Or if the enemy has 2 units, you attack with these guys and they kill the first unit, then their sacrifice ability will automatically destroy the second enemy unit. And of course Artellus Numion can give these guys Survivor 1, which will then allow them to just stick around and rinse and repeat. So these guys are pretty decent to include. I will generally have them in my Salamanders deck. Artificer Armor. Sometimes this card can do some absolutely ridiculous effects. But having said that, the main problem is that in Horus Heresy Legions there are a lot of removal abilities and tactics and things like that, and often just trying to invest a lot into making one super troop, like one with massive health, is not a good idea because the enemy can remove it with various means. So because of that, I don't like Artificer Armor. Ash and Bones is a fantastic tactic. It just immediately destroys a damaged enemy troop regardless of how much health it has left. So this card is actually extra important for Cassian Vaughn. As I mentioned, his energy ability is he spends 2 energy in order to damage all the enemies on the board. And then with Ash and Bones, you can spend a further 3 energy and kill any of those enemies you wanted. Any one of those enemies. So this is a great tactic. Frankly, every Warlord for the Salamanders can really benefit from this one. Chaplain Xaviar. This is the first of the legendary cards we're seeing, and he is actually really cool because of his rally ability. You plop him down between 2 of your troops and they both gain Survivor 1. If they already have Survivor, they gain an extra value on their Survivor. So a unit which had Survivor 1 becomes Survivor 2 if Chaplain Xaviar is put down next to it. And the best part is that when he then attacks, if he dies, he just returns to your hand and you can drop him again and give your troops Survivor again. So he's a really cool guy. Just watch out because the enemy will try to remove him or kill him and things like that. Actually, one neat little combo you can sometimes play is drop Chaplain Xaviar and then immediately play Ambassador Melgator and pull him back into your own hand as well. Alright. Next up, Egan Gargo. This guy has sort of average stats. His rally ability only triggers if you have infantry troops. So I will only generally include him in a deck where I'm sure I have lots of infantry. And remember, Space Marines do not count as infantry. So if you decide to include Egan Gargo, just make sure you're doing it in a deck where you've got a pretty decent chance of having infantry on the board before you play him. Otherwise, if you play him without that, I mean, he's just kind of pretty average. For 3 energy, he's 3-4. But if you play him with infantry on the board, for 3 energy, he's a 4-4 unit with front line, and that's pretty strong. Next up, Jura Squad. These guys are great with one problem. So They cost 3 energy, they only have 2 attack, but you should never be attacking directly with these guys. You want to spend 1 energy and deal 2 damage to an enemy and adjacent units. The only problem is they come in at 3 health, and because of that they're kind of easy to remove. Artellus Numion is the best solution here. He can give them Survivor 1 as they deploy, and then these guys become a real problem for the enemy. So definitely include these guys with Artellus Numion, but if you're any of the other warlords, you might want to think twice because they'll die too easy. They're big priority targets because of their powerful energy ability. Nocturne Born, I actually like this tactic a lot. It costs 3 energy, but it gives Survivor 1 to a friendly unit, and if the enemy has more units than you, it returns to your hand. So I tend to use this card with Vulcan in the late game, where I can actually, if I'm on a turn where I have 9 energy or 10 energy, I can place Survivor 3 times onto Vulcan by using Nocturne Born. It can also help you out with other troops, making a troop which would otherwise die stick around at a critical moment. Resilience. I don't like including this in my deck. Again, that's just because it's really situational. You're going to get the most value out of here when you already have a couple of troops on the board, and you can't always be assured that that will happen at the same time as Resilient comes into your hand. So I don't tend to include it. I'll play it only if I've accidentally generated it with Vulcan. Atok Abidemi. This guy is a really fantastic frontline troop. What makes him good isn't so much his stats, which are super average, but the fact that he has Survivor 2, which means he costs 4 energy but ends up taking 6 damage across at least 2 actions to kill, which makes him a really good frontline troop because he has he's very sticky. It's hard to remove him compared to many other front lines. So he's usually a solid part of my deck. Dragonscale Shield. This has the same problem as Artificer Armor. On the surface, it looks like a really great ability. It heals a troop, or if the troop's not taking damage, it gives it extra health. It gives the troop shield so it can take 1 extra hit, and it gives it front line. But there's too many removal abilities, and you're investing too much energy cost into one troop by playing Dragonscale Shield onto it. So I tend to not like it for that reason. Alright, let's take a look at what's next. Epistolary Rosten. Okay. This is the best card for the Salamanders, I think. He didn't even need a buff before, but then the devs gave him a huge buff as well. So what makes him so good? He costs 4 energy and he has 3 health and 3 attack. That's slightly below average, but he has a whopping Survivor 3, so he's actually a 6 health unit. But that's 6 health across 2 attacks. But the really cool thing is that when he attacks, if he dies, he deals 2 damage to all enemies. That means that he can actually help to clear the board for you, or you can use him to attack a unit that has 5 health, and he'll do 3 damage to it by attacking, and then he'll get killed, hopefully. But then as he dies, he'll do an extra 2 points of damage to the enemy you just attacked, as well as everything else on the enemy side, including the Warlord. And then if you're really lucky, he still has Survivor and he comes back to life, and he can repeat that again next turn. So Epistolary Rosten is so good, you must include him in your Salamanders deck. Gardos is almost as much of a must include. So just like Epistolary Rosten, it costs 4 energy, it has 3 attack and 3 health, but it's not going to attack directly. What it's going to be doing is you spend 2 energy and it deals 2 damage to all enemies, but it doesn't take any damage in return. And on top of that, it has Survivor 2, so it's relatively hard to kill and remove from the board. So Gardos tends to be one of my favorite Salamanders units as well. It pretty much goes in all my decks there too. Kagosy Squad. So Kagosy Squad is very similar to the other guy we saw before in that he has a rally effect which has synergy not with the Salamander Space Marines but with other unit types, in this case Imperial Army. So again, if your deck has lots of Imperial Army units in it, you can play Scorched Squad after you deploy them, and he gives them a pretty powerful buff, +1 attack, +1 health. If you don't have many Imperial Army troops, you don't want to include Scorched Squad because his rally ability will go to waste. Scorched Earth. This is a neat little tactic. It's not bad. It's reliable at least, right? It does 2 damage to all units, so on the enemy side and on your side. So unlike defense satellites, you know exactly what you're getting when you play this, so you're actually able to plan for its use much more carefully. So it's not bad. It's a decent card to include in your decks. Just watch out because it's going to damage your own troops too. Barracks. Alright, so this is another frontline unit, and as a frontline unit with these stats, he'd be pretty much good enough to include already as well. 5 energy, he has 4 attack, 5 health, and frontline. But the neat thing about him is that if he survives the turn you deploy him on, and he attacks the enemy next turn and he dies, he gets to stun a random enemy. So that's good news and bad news. It's bad news because the enemy knows that, and so they're going to take a huge effort to try to kill him in 1 turn. The good news is that if your enemy can't kill him in 1 turn, many times if they're decent, they may just choose to not touch him, meaning they're not going to try and do any attack, because they know that if they weaken him enough but they don't kill him, the next turn he's going to attack and do a random stun, possibly on something really important. So I like to include Barracks. He's a solid tank, and if he survives more than 1 turn, he opens up some interesting options for you. Next up is Tartar Squad. Tartar Squad is just totally average. Essentially, for 5 energy, you're getting a unit with 5 attack and 5 health. Now that 5 health requires it to be killed across 2 actions, but it's just totally average. So they're not impressive. If you must have them and put them in, but other than that, they're much better 5 energy units available, such as Nema Tor. This guy is super awesome, again, especially if you're playing as Artellus Numion. So Nema Tor has some decent stats of his own. He's got 4 attack and 4 health, as well as Survivor 1, so he's effectively got 5 health. But if he dies while attacking, all of your other units on the board heal for 3. So what you generally want to do is throw Nema Tor into either the toughest unit on the enemy board if he's undamaged, or if he has 2 or less health left, you throw him into the enemy Warlord, and then your own Warlord as well as all your other units gets healed. And if you're playing as Artellus Numion, after that you just play Survivor back onto Nema Tor, and he can keep trying to repeat that until he's finally wiped out. Volkov Squad is another fantastic 5 energy unit. Again, at first glance, their stats don't look great. They've got only 3 attack, but they do have 5 health and Survivor 1, so it's effectively 6 health. But their energy ability is super powerful. You spend only 2 energy and you deal 4 damage to a target of your choice. That can be the enemy Warlord, or it can be an enemy unit. So this guy helps you to keep board control by helping to soften up hard targets. Ancient Dakhlir. This is a legendary. It's a little bit underwhelming. Its stats are super average for its, well, frankly, are below average for its cost. It costs 6 energy, but its stats are 5 attack, 5 health. It has Survivor 2, and every turn that it's alive, it gains Survivor 1. The problem is that it's too expensive for what it is, right? And so I generally do not tend to include Ancient Dakhlir in my Salamanders decks. Chaplain Xaviar, on the other hand, I don't use him, but I've seen him used with devastating effect against me. For 6 energy, again, he's got slightly below average stats, but if he attacks and dies, all of your other troops gain a massive +2 attack and +2 health. So if you're able to use him right, he can give you a huge edge. I personally don't like it because it kind of relies on you having a couple more units apart from him on the board. And my own personal take is, with the nature of Salamanders units, if you're already dominating the board, it's really hard for you to lose that control anyway, and you're probably going to win the match. Alright. Next up is Zathan Pyro class. I love these guys. Again, their stats are underwhelming for their cost. 3 attack, 5 health, 6 energy. But they do have Survivor too, so that's effectively 7 health. But what I love about these is their energy ability. They deal 2 damage to an enemy and adjacent units, and then if anything died from that attack, so any of the 3 targets you hit died, you get to attack again, and again, and again. So you can often use this to like really whittle down an enemy board and just help yourself to keep total board control. I love these guys. They're incredibly satisfying to use. I tend to include them in my Salamanders deck. There are other people who feel that it's too tricky for this ability to be used to its full effect, but I just love it. Fire Drakes, I like these guys as well. Again, their stats are a little bit soft looking at first glance. At 7 energy, they only have 6 attack and 5 health, but they do start with Survivor 3, so that's effectively 8 health. And on top of that, every time they kill an enemy, they gain Survivor +2 as well. So with most units, you're kind of concerned about like wasting them on weak targets because that's chipping away at their own health. But these guys are really great for clearing up the enemy's board because you can hit their weakest targets with these and build up your survival ability, your Survivor ability here with them, or with 6 attack they can actually go up against a tough enemy and rely on their Survivor to keep them alive afterwards. So I like Fire Drakes. I tend to use them if I can. Predator Infernus. This one is... I like it. Most people don't. Again, the problem it has is it's got really low attack for 7 health, for 7 energy cost. Its health is relatively low. There's a fair number of abilities in the game which can wipe out a 6 health vehicle reasonably quickly. But if it survives to your next turn, this thing can actually have a pretty devastating effect because it can potentially do 12 damage to the enemy split across 3 targets. So I like it, just you're usually struggling with better options at 7 energy. Urdrakul. Okay, so generally speaking, Vulcan is the only one of the Salamanders Warlords who's going to be attacking, who's generally going to be attacking the enemy. Most of the time with Artellus Numion, you're going to be throwing out your Survivor skill and stuff like that. But this ability it gives your Warlord is really great. Destroy any troop who it attacks. Now the downside is your Warlord will take damage in return, so you may not want to actually hit the most powerful enemy units. But sometimes out of desperation you just might have to do that, and it gives you a good way of surprising your enemy by making that powerful guy he has on the board not stick around. I like to use this actually with Vulcan and his Reckoning, because if the enemy plays a powerful unit, well, I'll play Urdrakul, throw myself into that powerful unit, and afterwards trigger my Reckoning because that powerful unit killed me, and go and heal myself back up and give me Survivor again. Alright, coming up to the last couple of cards now. So, before that, we've got Ancient Xaviar. This guy sucks. Like, he's a guy who you play in late game only, and who really only helps you out if the enemy is outnumbering you. But by that point, if the enemy is outnumbering you late in the game, you're probably about to die anyway. So he's pretty pointless. Don't include him in your deck. Alright, Arcan. Arcan sounds pretty decent. It's a tough little vehicle, although it's sort of expensive for what it is. It costs 8 energy but only has 6 health and 6 attack. It does have Survivor too, so that's effectively 8 health, and it does have a shield, but that's about it. And most of the time your enemy will probably try to just bypass this guy instead because he has no front line, and you can afford to bypass him because he's only dealing 6 damage, and that late in the game there's some really tough or strong units out there. So because of that, I generally think Arcan's not a great idea to include in your deck. Dawnbreaker is the second of Vulcan's hammers, and this turns him into a beast, right? Gives him cleave 2, meaning he'll deal damage, 2 damage to each target next to yours. It also gives him attack 4, And if you've triggered his Reckoning, it means he effectively has attack 5, because his Reckoning increases his base attack value to 3, plus the 2 from Dawnbreaker gives it attack 5. So that can become really powerful. Again though, generally you only want this with Vulcan, because he's the only one of the Salamanders Warlords who's likely to be doing many attacks as opposed to using his special ability. Forge Father Tekel, you hardly ever see him in use. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen him on the ladder. I've only ever seen him in events. He's really expensive. His stats are okay-ish for that price, but they're 8 attack, 8 health, and he's got Survivor 5, so that's effectively 13 health. And usually by this point in the game, most of the hard removal cards will have been played, and so he sticks around. The problem is, there's so many better things out there for 9 energy. I mean, his energy ability is draw a tactic from your deck and reduce its cost by 5. Well, the Salamanders don't generally tend to rely on expensive tactics anyway, so this is sort of a bit overkill, and it means you have this giant body on your board with 8 attack, 8 health, and he's not actually attacking or anything. He's not helping to defend because he doesn't have front line. He's just outclassed by many of the other 9 energy cards. Like, to compare him with the Raven, who's a 9 energy card for the Night Lords, that guy also has 8 attack and 8 health, but he's got fast, so you can drop the Raven and attack immediately. Whereas this guy, you drop him and he sits there for until your next turn, and then you can do something. So I think he's a hard pass. You don't want to include him in your deck. And the final one is Abraxas. This kind of has the same problem that the Land Raider Arcan had. Abraxas has similar stats. It's got slightly better attack, much more health. It also has a shield, and it's got this energy attack ability. But the problem is, this late in the game, it gets over. You've got other problems on the board, right? So I think it's just not worth spending your 10 energy dropping this guy and then not being able to do anything else at all. So I find Abraxas to be a hard pass as well. So that's a review of the deck. I might do a Vulcan deck build guide if I have time, although with Space Wolves coming out in less than 2 days, I probably will be focusing on those guys instead. But maybe at some point in May I'm going to do a Vulcan guide, because I do like playing as Vulcan. I find he's fun. A lot of people, you don't see him that much on Terra, so a lot of people forget how to face him. And yeah, he can be a good time. So just in summary, if you're playing Salamanders, a couple of cards you definitely always want to include. They're going to be Roshan Squad. They're also going to be where's it gone here? Epistolary Rosten, and probably Gardos. Alright, so with that, hopefully you've got a good idea now of how the Salamanders cards line up. In 2 days, I'm definitely going to be making a Space Wolves card review as well, so stay tuned for that. If you're not subscribed, just remember to subscribe now and you get notified as soon as that goes up. So until then, see you guys.